All right. Thank you, Girish. And I invite Ravi, Srinivas, Keur on the platform.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh.
Thank you, Keur, for joining.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh.
Doctor, this is Atul. I can't, start my video. I think you have stopped it from there.
No. I think they will work with you and get you on board. All right. So, welcome, gentlemen. I think I've already defined some context of planning, but let me go back into, taking the discussion further. As I said, this is one industry which has seen a tremendous change and compositional change in product mix. This is one industry which has seen a huge need to move from one place to another place and to the last mile. This is one industry which had to innovate and meet the challenges of a new epidemic. This is one industry which did amazingly well during this period of time, the difficult period of time. Supply chain planning, as I said, and I've been reading reports, and I know Ravi at times always says that it's a highly regulated industry, but so what? A highly regulated industry should also be one which is moving towards planning this disruption in a better ways. And to start this particular discussion, I don't want to go deeper into my views on this, but what I suggest is that we have kept it very open to any questions. I will give 3 to 4 minutes to each one of you to speak on the general trend in the supply chain planning in pharma. I may just add some dimension so that we have continuity in the discussion rather than repetition in the discussion. So I'll start with Srinivas. And Srinivas, what has been the major strategic shift in supply chain planning during this 1.5 years of pandemic? And where do you see, because a very crisis time also brings about what you call the drawbacks and gaps in supply chain. So what do you see as the major transformation that has taken place in supply chain planning now, the challenges that we see, how the assumptions have changed?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. It's actually an honor and a privilege to be on the panel with all of you guys, with the esteemed guests. Yeah. And so coming back to the question, Dr. Rakesh, pandemic, as everybody says, is actually a black swan event, as they say. And is that something which we can plan for? This has been a question which has been zooming. In fact, I was having my own town hall with my own colleagues within Sun Pharma, and this was a question which actually came up. And it's a very interesting take on it, to be honest with you. Given my background, where I said that my background is mostly in the initial part of 25 years in FMCG, and then in the last 4 years in pharmaceuticals. When I actually moved in, as typical supply chainers would actually talk about and say and do, optimization of costs, optimization of inventories, and just in time, and the whole 9 yards used to happen. Yeah. During the pandemic, a lot of companies which were not very efficient actually ended up gaining, specifically in the pharma sector. When I say not very efficient, which means people who were carrying a lot of inventories. Let me be very blunt about it. Yeah, of course, the agility in terms of response and so on and so forth is a very important element. Yeah, and there are multiple dimensions which have happened in terms of transportation. What we have seen in the last 2 years, whether it is actually the shipping side or on the airlines and everything. But I am actually going to restrict myself towards actually planning, which is exactly the question which you posed, Dr. Rakesh. As a supply chainer for the first 25 years of my life, I always was very fascinated by the Japanese concept of just in time. And we said that everything should be minimal inventories. And I am one of those guys who was pushing for it. In fact, we reduced multi-million, multiples of tens of millions of dollars of inventory across our company. And then suddenly the pandemic came and struck across, and we realized that, there is some reason why actually pharmaceutical companies do actually carry a little more inventory. And the reason for that is essentially that the patients actually tend to look upon the medicines from an end date perspective and not from a starting date, which means if the shelf life, if it is manufactured in June 2020, expiry in 2022, as a patient, I actually look at it June 22 as the end time. Whereas in a foods company, people tend to look at it from the starting point, which means the freshness on the shelf. Yeah, that's not a very, very relevant concept or a prevalent one in the pharma industry. Yeah. So what has actually pandemic done to us? It has actually given us some licenses to kill in terms of holding a little more inventories. In the right baskets, though, I'm not saying that you should hold inventories across those things. Yeah, it is also said that if the supply chain is a little bit longer, it might actually end up a little more continuity. Let me explain to you what I mean to say. If 65% of the industry is actually about exports in the country, and when you are exporting on an airplane, there is no pipeline inventory on the sea. Whereas when you're exporting on a sea, there is a pipeline inventory of 30 days. And if there is something which happens to you in terms of the demand surge or a forecast which actually is getting sucked away there, you have another 30 days to actually respond to, because there is inventory on the sea. Yeah. So 2 dimensions, as I mentioned, that just in time was a concept which was very prevalent with us. Now we also look at just in case, and which means just in case if these kinds of things happen, how do we actually tackle these stories? I'm not saying that we need to plan for these events like what happened in the pandemic, because this is once in a decade or once in a lifetime kind of an event. But we need to keep these things at the back of the mind and say that just in case something of this sort happens, how are we going to respond? So the business continuity plans is one part of the story. And then there is another spectrum, which is the just in case plans. So these are the 2 different planning scenarios, which we actually end up doing a lot more than what we used to during the regular world. Yeah. Of course, I will leave it to the rest of the panel members to actually comment upon the nitty-gritties and other aspects which I have not touched upon. I realize that I've taken almost about 3.5 minutes. Dr. Rakesh. So, one of the key concepts which I actually am struck with is what do we do just in case these kinds of things happen? Keep it at the back of the mind. Make sure that we have something at the back of the mind which we can actually pull it and start reacting to those things.
Thank you, Srinivas, for that elaboration. I think planning has been widely debated pre and post pandemic and during the pandemic. I think there are views on just in time, as you rightly said. There are requirements for meeting pandemics or black swan events, which are very difficult. And, maybe they are one-time event. God knows how things are shaping now and what would be the frequency of these events, if not black swan disruptive events. Atul, can you say how have been the forecasting and planning and the supply chain operating during the COVID period in terms of managing products, in terms of aligning supplies to the product? And you come from a board which has done exceptionally well during this period of time. So if you could elaborate on this for the next 3 minutes, that would be fine.
Thanks, Doctor. So I think I'll just start with the first sentence saying that the connected world, the problem spreads very fast. And, in this particular pandemic situation, I'm sorry, the most important thing is that how to disconnect yourself and get back on your feet. And that is the major learning which we had in terms of, because we understand that, the availability challenges in terms of APIs, as well as our manufacturing sites had a challenge in terms of manpower and others. So ultimately, initial time, what we wanted to do in terms of first shock when it came, obviously, as you mentioned, doctor, we obviously had put in a sort of control tower to look at, the what best we can do now and what are the working resources that we are available with us. Post the next level, when we started coming back to our feet, was what we should do, how we can support our partners so that they can stand on their feet. Otherwise, it's whole ecosystem. We cannot be, alone trying to stand there. And that's where, as Srinivas mentioned, it's ultimately we have to be connected and in the lean type of atmosphere, wherein we, with this connection, actually, we have to ensure that everything works as smooth as possible. And that's where there were certain supports which we provided to our partners, or sort of a strategic partners, by which we ensured two things. The first one is that they can stand there on their feet very fast. And the second one was that we got the requisite support from them as well. Now coming back to the demand planning area, to be honest, whatever the, you can say, mathematical formulas and all those, that was completely collapsed. Obviously, it collapses in this situation because, see, the pre-COVID, the assumptions of demand are different, and during COVID, the assumptions are very different. I think we have to relook at our assumptions, and we were not clear about our assumptions. So it was the supply chain which was working out as a reactive supply chain instead of, I can say, proactive supply chain. And that's where the entire force or the pressure went to the infrastructure of the supply chain, the processes of supply chain, and the IT of supply chain. And that's what we try to cope up by, supporting and working together. So in terms of demand, we were chasing demand, but not sure whether we will meet up demand. The second one, in terms of supplies, we had to curtail some of our products which currently were not required. And that's where we may have to take some hard decisions. So in that way, ultimately, as you asked me about the overall supply chain, I think I gave a top view of overall supply chain, what we try to do, as well as in terms of demand area, what you asked about is about what you did. And to be honest with you, we are still trying to redefine our assumptions. So that's what is my short answer.
Thank you, Atul. And I think supply chain models definitely went for a toss because there was no history to that particular data, and any forecast based on that would have not worked during this period of time. And assumption changed that in time of uncertainties, the old trained models may not work well. I bring in Dr. Ravi Prakash Mathur here. Ravi, you have been managing supply chains pretty brilliantly. You all have introduced a vaccine with partnership, Sputnik, and managing all these would have been a big challenge. What has been the dramatic challenges in the planning? Because securing logistics for this, securing storage capacity and temperature control storage for this, understanding the various geographies where you can distribute this, as well as sourcing it from the global market, all is a classic example of supply chain planning challenges, and that too amidst a pandemic. So how have all these been managed?
Okay, thanks, Dr. Rakesh. And first of all, thank you for inviting me on this forum. Your question specifically on vaccine and planning during a pandemic period is, in addition to being a supply planning problem, it is also a very big logistics planning problem. Like you rightly called out, how do you plan for warehouses, especially the -20 vaccine that we've been handling, and so many uncertainties around approvals, time of arrival, etc. So how do you really, how do you actually navigate the entire decision-making process, at what time you do what. But before I come to that, I'd just like to add on to the previous discussions that have been happening, and you yourself mentioned in your opening remarks about the high inventory levels. And of course, this is the, everybody's been talking about, and the pharma supply chain has been like the favorite, bashing bag for, calling out supply chain inefficiencies, which I think is a little unfair because, to understand why pharma ends up carrying a lot of inventory, you would first understand the pharma business model per se, So I'll talk about a little basics and then probably, a little more into detail. First and foremost, we must understand that pharma is still a batch manufacturing industry, We still operate in batches, whether it is finished goods or whether it is APIs. We are not a line manufacturing industry, unlike in automotive industry where you are able to work on a single piece flow, you are able to work on an assembly line or any other system that works on just in time. Pharma remains to be in batch processes. That's the nature of the industry. Okay, so though you might bring in, make it as near a line process as you want to, but there are issues that will always be there. And I will just give one because, in the interest of time, in pharma, you have something which is called a changeover time. Okay, now in the automotive industry, the changeover time was solved for many decades ago, when you had these automatic changes of the dies. But here, because of the regulatory nature of the industry, you really cannot do much about the changeover time unless you have a planning solution that minimizes changeover time. Again, you come back to algorithms, detailed scheduling solutions, and so on. But that's something that you will live with. The other thing is that Indian pharma per se is a generic industry. Okay. Now, when you're talking about a generic industry, you must understand the nature of the business is that is your product is open to substitution. Okay. If you are not there on the shelf, if you are not there with the chemist, you are a generic. Even in branded markets like India or Russia, if you are not there available for the customer when he needs it, your product will get substituted. So you really cannot have a JIT that extends all the way. Okay, there has to be inventory at the chemist place. There has to be inventory in the warehouse preceding that. So while we all talk about the fancy JIT, vendor managed inventory, and all that, pharma will have to have some element of inventory always there in the business model. Now, two more critical things about the pharma industry is that pharma industry's revenue streams, there are basically two revenue streams. One is your existing products. The other thing is pharma needs to always have a pipeline of new products. Okay. And when you are working on a pipeline of new products and you're launching a new product, you have to carry the launch inventory. Okay. If you do slicing and dicing of the data that you have in pharma, you will see a large chunk of the so-called 170 days or 180 days comes from new product inventory. The other point is that in the pharma industry sector, there are a lot of inorganic moves that happen. There are mergers and acquisitions. Just to give a very simple example, then there are so many other options on acquiring assets. Okay, so when you do an inorganic move, normally you get inventory that comes with it. Okay, so that's the second major bucket of inventory that actually adds up to the 150 to 170 days. The last point that I just want to elaborate is that pharma supply chains by nature are extended. They start from the finished goods, but unless you have a secure API base, and then for the secured API base, you have something which is called, suppliers of excipients, suppliers of key starting material, even feedstock. For all your important assets or your important molecules, you will need to have an integration or at least some level of control all the way. Okay. Now, what that means is for every node in the supply chain, you have a possibility of, doing it internally or externally. Okay. So if I were just to do a 2x2 into 4 modes of this thing, so I end up in 2 into 2 into 2 into 2. So, though that many options you have. Now, there are many, my friends in the pharma supply chain, my esteemed friends are here on the forum, and they will tell you a lot of time of supply chain professionals actually goes in making changes to the supply chain. Okay. It could be a site change, it could be taking a molecule outside or taking a molecule inside, and it happens at every node. Okay. Now, every time there's a move in the supply chain, some node shifts. What comes with it is bridge inventory. Okay, if you don't build in that bridge inventory, you will not be able to make a move from an external site to an internal site, from a near to customer to away from customer. Okay, from your own API to an outsourced API. Every move costs you in terms of inventory. Okay, so by when we criticize that pharma is 150 days in inventory, let's also understand why pharma has to operate in that. Now, I'm not offering all of these as an excuse why these inventories have to be there. But then I think pharma also has the digital maturity. I think amongst a lot of other industries, the digital maturity in terms of adoption of ERPs, in terms of adoption of advanced planning and optimizing engines, in terms of MRP and MPS that we did 20 years ago. And now we are on to integrated business planning. I think we know the problems, but I can also say that we know how to solve for it. So I will just leave that as my comment, and maybe talk about vaccines some other time, maybe later in the panel if time permits.
Right. I think, Ravi, a good elaboration of why there should be an inventory. But one simple question, which is not to you, to the panel as whole, is that why not an optimal balance of inventory for few products and a just-in-time for few products? And why have a generic single one supply chain for multiple supply chain?
No, I'll tell you, there is no, number one, there is no one single supply chain. In pharma, in a single company, there can be as many as 64 supply chains. So first of all, we must understand, we are not talking about a linear arrangement of, material flowing from a vendor to the customer. So for a portfolio of 500 SKUs on the finished side, you have 20,000 raw material SKUs. Okay. And you have those many vendors, right? So all those crisscrosses of those supply chain that happen, the one point I forgot to mention in my earlier comment was that, and which you also really called out, that this is a regulated industry. Now, supposing there is a chemical that becomes a part of your drug master file, you cannot change that supplier. You have to go through a post-approval change process. Okay, you can't change the specification of your input material. You have to go for a post-approval change process. So all these are long lead time processes. Some of them can take as long as a year, right? So that is a challenge for, pharma to be really very agile, where somebody can go onto a reverse auction platform and say, okay, I want the best price and the best vendor. In pharma, you don't really have that liberty for a major chunk of your input material. You can do it for commoditized products like shippers, packing materials, maybe even export freight. But for very critical input materials, you need to have change control. These are long lead time things, before you do something, around changing those.
Ravi, I'll come back to the next question in the next round, what needs to be done. I think you have brought about passionately the challenges to pharma supply chain and planning. And I think that's very interesting to understand it from a very cross industry perspective. Let me go back to Keyur. Keyur, you are one of the major equipment suppliers and medical equipment suppliers. During the pandemic, you people have gone through a similar challenges of being agile, being responsive, being even what I would call it as reflexive and granular into the geographies. What has helped you to become such a very active organization during the pandemic when uncertainties are abound? Keyur, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh, and very good morning to all. I think first and foremost, I come from a company called Thermo Fisher Scientific, and our mission is to enable our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer. So that's the mission with which each one of us operate. And as you rightly said, we were in the thick of the supply planning and demand forecasting processes during the pandemic, and we were working very closely with some of our friends who are there on the panel. So Dr. Reddy is our customer, Sun Pharma is our key customers, and we have many customers whom we have partnered for vaccine distribution as well. So from the overall demand planning perspective, if I were to see, the forecasting era has completely changed. Earlier, we were looking at exponential smoothing, using exponential smoothing and determining the trend of how the consumptions were done. But with pandemic coming in, everything has completely gone for a toss because I did not have any trend with me. The only thing what was available with us was a very close connect to our customers, So what we really established is a end-to-end supply chain, which we call it as an extended supply chain, where we have a complete alignment between the vendors, the manufacturers, and the customers. And how do we do that? It's through seamless flow of data and information, and it flows both ways, from the customer back to the vendors and from vendors back to the customer. Leveraging digital tools like machine learning, some of the machine learning tools, which helped us actually forecast the demand much faster compared to any of our older versions of algorithms, which were using more of a trend and seasonality into it, or building seasonality into it. So I think machine learning did help us. Putting up new tools through digital and connecting with customers definitely helped us get the right inputs and insights from the customers. And we worked for reducing lead times with our vendors, especially the air. We also worked with people like Blue Dart, who were helping us move material from the one airport to the customer's end. And we have seen a phenomenal result flowing in. So I think from that perspective, we were also closely working with government to understand what the government policies are, and keeping that or building that into our demand planning process is a very key fundamental that has seen a change post the pandemic. And this would continue for a certain period of time till we actually get to a stabilized demand situation. So I think all of this has helped us connect with the customer and deliver our customer requirement and thereby live for our mission.
Thank you, Keyur. I think one of the workable strategy during such time of pandemic definitely has been, as Ravi or you were saying, or even Srinivasan said, is the extended supply chain, and how you see the extended supply as one schedule and part of the overall supply chain. And I think not only pharma, but our discussion with all the other industry has said that this has been the most resilient outcome of the past relationships. When you work in silos, when you work on transactional basis with a partner, those companies have been very highly affected in the sense that securing supply bases, securing transportation, securing warehouses, securing markets also have been very difficult for transaction players and it taught us a lesson that planning a prerequisite is extended collaborative supply chain. I think you raise another very, very nice question. Forecasting. I think you said the old exponential smoothing model has been not working. I think it has never been working. Leave apart, more deterministic models have given way to more resilient strategies and models. Ravi, I'll come back to you now on this. I'll just break the order so that we get some input from the right thing. You have been an advocate of machine learning and artificial intelligence, as Keyur has been here, right? What is the advantage of using this kind of technologies or these kind of tools which are in abound today in terms of helping plan during disruptions and also planning for the future?
Correct. So Rakesh, I'll break the problem into two things. At one set of data is data that is internal to you. That is enterprise data. So you have your previous demand forecasts and you have your previous supply performance data. Similarly, your suppliers' performance data that you have. And as far as the internal enterprise planning challenges are concerned, I think the solutions are pretty mature. I think as old as maybe 30, 40 years when the first MRP and the first MPS engines came into the picture, and then we are all aware how the the maturity of the entire thing went. So as far as planning your resources, allocating capacities, placing purchase orders, following up with your vendors, enterprise-related challenges are there. I think I will not completely agree that your forecasting, solutions have failed you. Okay, I think something extra needs to be done on that to really make it work and fine-tune it. The other part is your external data. Okay, now because what the pandemic has done is that it has made us realize that the entire ecosystem is vulnerable. It's not just our ecosystem, our immediate suppliers, even your customers' ecosystem, supply chains are vulnerable. Okay, and many a times you might be sharing the same suppliers all the way to the key starting material. Okay, so data about your external ecosystem now becomes very important, because in addition to your internal planning and your internal processes, you have to understand how the external world is also behaving. So therein, I want to bring in the concept of supply intelligence. Okay, now in all forums and in all management, thought leadership meetings, people will talk about market intelligence, right? But they'll be focused on the customer. They will be focused on the customer, right? Or your competitors, right? What is your competitor doing? But I think the time is now right that you also start developing the intelligence for your supply chain at the back end. And that is where your artificial intelligence and your machine learning can really help you model and create a platform that gives you, in addition to a demand forecast, which you already have, some sort of a supply forecast. That is where the technology and the builders of these platforms, they need to focus, or these companies internally have to focus. That is one. Now, coming back to the demand forecasting side, which we have been talking about, there are a couple of, you're going to break it down into the time dimension. There is one which is a 3-month tactical horizon, which is basically the SNOP part of it. Then there is a long term, maybe a year long, and then there is a strategic 5-year out planning decisions that need to be taken. So normally SNOPs, and when we talk about planning, we're actually talking about tactical 3-month planning, where you have to plan for allocating production capacities and plan for placing the orders for your raw material. Now, forecasting is tough in these times, but the solution, the way you crack for it, is not to build more inventory. Okay, so therein I will disagree with the point of view that the way forward to deal with this uncertainty is to buffer the inventory more. I think the technology that you really need to focus on and bring those processes internal to the organization that will help you deal with the situation is scenario modeling. Okay, there again is an element of machine learning. I will not say deep learning or artificial intelligence, but you need machine learning frameworks to be able to create scenarios, create a response for those scenarios, and also check your capabilities to respond for those scenarios. Okay, so scenario modeling that enables you to run the entire scenario end to end. There are ways to do it. We are doing it. And then based on your judgment, intuition, or executive call, and something that a recommendation that a system tells you, you take a bet on the scenarios you think will play out. But the capability to develop is the ability to visualize scenarios, to imagine scenarios, and to plan for them, and not to buffer up inventory. That was my only comment, Rakesh.
All right. I think I'll take up a part of yours comment and just broad base the issue. When you look at tactical planning, SNOP, I think in the world of FMCGs and even in pharma globally, I've been seeing a new concept called demand-driven material requirement planning. And I think it has been very widely recognized by people that this is something which is bringing agility into the system. If I would not agree with resilience, but the agility in the system by defining the buffers. I think thank you, Ravi, for not agreeing with so many buffers, and hence the role for planning supply chain for pharma becomes a very critical element of moving ahead. I'll go back to Srinivas and talk to him about what are the alternative approaches that we can use in terms of actually planning the supply chain with the processes like our organizational agility processes like DMRP, SNOP, or IBP, what Ravi has been talking about. So over to Srinivas.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Rakesh. And I think Dr. Ravi made a very good synopsis of what are the various things which we can actually make use of, including actually one of the things which will actually help us. So there was COVID wave 1, then there was COVID wave 2, and now people are actually predicting the COVID wave 3. Let me put it this way. Yeah. And I keep kidding with all my supply chain planners and the forecasting fellows that if the weatherman can actually forecast the weather, with a very reasonable level of accuracy. Why is it that we are not able to forecast our demand in the marketplace when we know our customers, when we know our products, and the weatherman does not know what is going to be happening in the sea or wherever it is? Yeah. So one of the critical elements here is to be able to sense the demand. Yeah. So sensing and pivoting the demand is an extremely important tool. We should actually start using it as early as possible in the phase rather than actually reacting to it. Because once we are in a position to sense the demand at a patient level, at a chemist level, and translate that into a projected forecast, and then translate that into material requirement planning, the agility which actually Dr. Mathur you were talking about, or Dr. Singh you were talking about, can actually improve by multiple times, not by percentage, in my opinion. In some of the markets, it's quite easily possible, to be honest with you. In some markets, it may not be possible. Let me give you an example of, let's say, a developed market like Western Europe or even North America for that matter. The sensing at a chemist level is actually very much possible. Are there companies which are trying to do it? Yes, there are some of the companies which are trying to do this sense and pivot. Now, what happens is that by the time that particular oversale at the chemist is getting translated to actually shipping from our distribution center, and then getting translated to the sales colleagues, and then they giving feedback to the supply chain forecasting fellows, and then the whole thing coming to our factories here, it's almost 35 days gone. Now, we can actually gain this 35 days and bring a lot of agility if we have something to be able to sense it at a chemist level, at a patient level. Yeah, so that is one of the things which we do not do as an industry so well. Let me be honest about it. And there are companies which have actually started saying that we can do these things extremely well. The other thing which also people talk about is aggregation of positives and negatives. Now, so let me tell you, and you take US as an example. US is a very lumpy demand. There are 3 customers for most of the pharma companies who actually have a 90% market share, right? So 2 issues with actually being able to forecast the demand in a country like US. Number one, it's a lumpy demand. If one customer decides to order, let's say 2x, then your forecast accuracy is gone out, assuming that all 3 are the same, it's gone out by 1 by 3 times. Yeah. That will not happen in cases like India and various other places, because we have so many customers and the aggregation of errors actually happen, and therefore the demand is much more easily forecastable in a country like India. Now, when you have a lumpy demand, and to add to the problem of a lumpy demand in a country like US, it's actually a generic molecule. What happens is that if there is 3 companies which are supplying, let's say, an atorvastatin as a molecule, I'm just taking as an example to illustrate. Yeah, 1 or 2 of the companies have gone out of the market. Then this particular atorvastatin can be replaced by the company B from company A. It doesn't happen so much in India because India is actually a branded generic kind of a market, and the replacement happens over a period of time. When there is no material in the market, people will come back to the doctors, then the doctors will start prescribing it, and so on and so forth. So the response time available for a market like India is much higher because of 2 very big reasons. One is that the demand is not lumpy, and the other is it's a branded generic as compared to, let's say, the Western market like United States. Yeah. So what can we do? So, but then there is a big advantage of actually the Western world that we are in a position to sense the demand at the chemist level much better, because there are tools and tackles. There is so much digitization, including serialization and aggregation, which has happened in some of the countries in Western Europe and in North America. So that gives us the ability to actually look at the sales at a chemist level as to which batch is going on, what is happening, and so on and so forth. So to be able to integrate these things into our demand forecasting will actually give us a huge benefit to be able to smoothen the supply chain. And we've done this numbers, by the way. And when I'm quoting the numbers of 35 days, we've actually seen the lag, which can be shifted. And 35 days is a long enough time for any planning process to actually get ahead of. Yeah, it's not about inventory reduction, but it's also about being able to kind of forecast. As we are sitting, believe me or not, all of us are actually thinking that we should actually build up inventories for the COVID wave 3. And I can guarantee that most of us as companies would have built up some inventory or the other for India market, and 20% of that will go for a write-off over a period of time. Yeah. Now, in the absence of such thing, and I actually give a parallel of, let's say, a COVID wave 3 to a weatherman equivalent, saying that if there is a storm which is coming in, are there things which we can sense and say that there is a storm which is coming in and we evacuate the people from the coast and do whatever it requires? Yeah. So is there something which we could do in demand forecasting as well, from sensing those particular elements which will actually give us, even events like COVID wave 3 being, let's say, a storm? For example, it's not just about the cases we are talking about, it's also about the type of spread, it's also about the geography in which it is spreading, and there are a variety of things. Now, do I have an answer for that? Definitely not. Yeah. Do I want to pretend a little more intelligent than others? No, that's not the idea. But the whole idea is to actually stir up a conversation, which means that instead of just taking the punt on whether how much inventory should I build up for, let's say, methylprednisolone injection, where I do not make too much money. And believe me or not, the government was actually after all of us during the wave 2, trying to have weekly meetings at very, very senior levels from DOP and other places, trying to get all the COVID medicines, yeah, to the patients. So I'm saying that, instead of just actually follow through, we should try to find what are those signals which we can figure out to be able to kind of predict a storm.
Right.
If everyone is able to predict a storm, can I predict a wave 3? Now, it's not just about one signal of how many.
Right, Srinivas, I think that's a very good point that has been brought about. But before we take up this into one more round of discussion with people, let me bring in Atul. Atul, how have you all built the resilience during this period of time? Quickly, because we're running out of time.
Yeah,
2 minutes
I understood.
would be easier. Yeah.
I'll try to be shorter than that.
Yeah.
So the first point, I think I would like to add to just now whatever Srinivas just now said is, see, we can predict a storm, but it might be lightning tomorrow.
Yes.
It is different. So it's actually this, and it goes back to what Ravi mentioned about as a scenario planning. I think we need to look at the scenario that, okay, we now learned a pandemic and other thing, but not necessarily tomorrow is going to be pandemic. It might be something. It might be Afghanistan. It might be something else. So, okay, now leave that aside to respond to these two gentlemen's comments. Now, my feedback about resilience was we actually worked on two-stream approach. One approach is the one which are required for COVID medicine, and for which we actually put in all our efforts, energies, so that whenever now, if at all there can be any failure, we need to have something alternative or additional stocks and other things, wherein we were open for building up additional stocks for those which are required for COVID, because this was for a purpose that we have to save as many lives as possible. And the other ones which were on a regular run products, we actually were putting in bit of a less efforts and less energies. Maybe post-COVID, we may have to change this complete scenario. To answer, we had a focused approach on those which are currently required in terms of building in resilience, and all of us understand how you can build a resilience. So I don't want to answer that. So I stop here. Thanks.
Rakesh, I'll come in uninvited. So, before you go to career, sorry, Keyur. So I just wanted to add it on what Srinivas and Atul have been talking about. I think specific to COVID and the COVID products, I think these products don't really lend themselves very easily to discussions on demand sensing or flexibility on, because number one, forget about forecasting their demand. You are dependent on the regulators to tell you which medicines are actually being approved for COVID. Remember the early days of the first wave, it was hydrochlorocurine. Everybody was running after hydrochlorocurine. And then, then the regulators said, no, sorry, this is not a drug that really works. I also remember the day everybody was, taking a 12 mg of ivermectin every day as a preventive medicine, to not to get infected. And then, the other medicines, came, and then there was a increase in demand, and then there was a narrative that these are not really necessary. Doctors are unnecessarily prescribing these medicines and all that. So it really does not become a demand forecasting problem. This problem is, far wider, and to really try to be on top of that which therapy to plan for. Then the extension is, it really extends to R&D, to clinical trials, to investing money, millions of dollars on international studies and all that. That becomes a totally different discussion. So, COVID products, not really a good learning experience as far as traditional forecasting or planning is concerned.
Right. But within the COVID period, there are other products which have seen the variability, seen the uncertainty, and obviously what you said and Srinivas said makes a lot of sense. COVID products are one-time distortions in the terms of planning. They cannot be planned for. They have to be actually organized, and they have to be, there you need more and more of agility and organizations which can build partnership, build research, and know the market well. They have the strength of the supply chain, will definitely succeed. Going to Keyur. Keyur, what has been your understanding of this uncertainty, not just in terms of COVID, but larger, as Ravi says, and how do you plan your planning for future? What are the processes that you would like to build in, not just the techniques, processes that you would like to build in the process, like Mathur was talking about IBP, right? What are the processes? How do you bring these processes to understand and do the demand sensing and effectively use the demand sensing, defining your overall supply chain end to end in continuity? So whether it is your capacity planning, whether your distribution planning, whether it is your manufacturing, your MRP, bill of material, and sourcing, they all have an intelligence which definitely, makes uncertain, a little certain for planning.
I think thanks, Dr. Rakesh. A very pertinent question, and I think first and foremost, I think all of us know that during COVID, I think over a period of time we have started understanding and working towards a term called agile supply chain, and making the supply chain agile, to my mind, is making it more intelligent, interconnected, and communicative. And as I was talking about that communication seamless communication within the extended supply chain piece. On the processes piece, specifically when you ask about on the planning side, while we historically we have been talking about the regular SIOP or SNOP that we talk about, the planning process starts with that, where you hand over the statistical forecast, and then that is where the discussions tend to start off. Now there are a lot more intelligent inputs that are required to come into that, and as we have always been saying, market intelligence. I think we have to move much more than what market intelligence was giving us. I think we need to incorporate not only the competitor data, but I think government policies play an important role. Geopolitical conditions play an important role. For example, when we had those China issues that had come up, suddenly things getting imported from China had a longer lead time, and which was not seen. I mean, I couldn't get a manufacturing setup done within the country or outside of China for a part that I am importing from China all along. So I think those kind of factors will have to get incorporated in the planning system. And while we talk about scenario planning, we spoke about decision making and planning sensing. I think all of these inputs will have to get into the planning system during the SIOP. And I think we'll have to start planning for a shorter horizon. Because only when we start planning for a shorter horizon, we will be able to incorporate those changes or the market dynamics that are happening in the market. and to my mind, COVID is going to get extended, and we don't know. There are a lot of school of thoughts whether third wave will be there, not there, and how long those waves will continue. So from that perspective, I think we will have to break up our SIOPs from a quarterly to a monthly or to a fortnightly basis and keep iterating the numbers. That is where the lead time communication and the lead times will also play an important role. That's where our connectivity using digital tools and using the connect with the customer and the vendors will play a vital role. So all of this put together, I think we will be able to have a much better customer experience, and we'll be able to connect and deliver the right product. Storing inventory may not be the solution. In fact, while we talk about planning, I think networking also will be a key challenge. The distribution network that each one of us has will also play a vital role in terms of once the GST had come, people started consolidating. I think COVID has brought up one more or has given us a chance to think whether we need to again decentralize and get the distribution network nearer to the customer to reduce the lead time to that extent. I think these are all processes that will have to get incorporated, and we'll have to keep iterating them as we move forward as the COVID scenario goes up, and that is how we'll be able to service and improve our customer experience.
Thank you, Keyur. I think that's a good thing of iterating our processes to streamline our supply chain. I'll have an open question. We have just 2-3 minutes left, and I have an open question. I'll start. Anyone can take it. While we say that we need SIOP, SOP, and IBP, major practitioners' research. This is not even an academic research that have been saying. There are a lot of potholes and pitfalls in SIOP, SNOP, and IBP. And organizations, I would talk it in some, iterative sense that most organizations say, I have an SNOP, but I also have a dynamic SNOP. And, that facilitates almost every outliers that happens in the non-SNOP framework. Now, why do SNOPs don't perform and bringing that organizational agility? So I will give 1 minute to each one of you so that, we can have an aggregate view. We'll start with Atul.
Okay, so I think the SNOP as a process is defined based on a stable atmosphere and stable things. In terms of, and that's where it comes as a replanning process. It comes after a month's time because it is assumed that after a month, certain numbers are substantially changed and we have to go back to the books. Here, the current situation is so dynamic and so fast that today's decision today morning may change by evening. And that's where I think we'll have to look at checking about our clock speed of the SNOP is my comment on this. And that's where we are working on.
Keyur?
So from my perspective, I think while SIOP and SNOP, as we say, is pretty important from the process point of view, I think we'll also have to build or take into consideration the uncertainties that are there and keep revisiting, because SNOP is only a tool that will give me a view of what's going to happen from the business standpoint and from the demand standpoint. But I think I'll have to get in the variability that's coming in because of the current situation. And that incorporating those variability at what point in time is something that's pretty important. And that's where I was talking about reducing the horizons of the planning buckets.
Right. Thank you, Keyur. Srinivas?
I think pretty much covered by most of us. And I don't think, SNOP will not have a role to play. It will have a role to play, as Atul mentioned, in a steady state operation. And people have been talking about keeping the SNOP aside for a little while, and then they talk of sales and execution plan and a variety of those things. But having said that, I would say that, they do have their own role to play. And from time to time, there will be challenges which will come from practitioners and executioners like us, which will actually further refine the role of SIOP and SNOP. And that is what I would call as a continuous improvement in these processes. Yeah.
Thank you. Ravi?
Yeah, so I think, this is
I'm
supply chain.
I'm giving you the final word on this.
Yeah, thanks for that, because I was taking notes about what everybody's saying. I think what we all heard was, replanning. That's a concept that we heard. Everybody has been talking about the same thing: iterative planning, scenario modeling, short-term reviews, or in terms of the technology, it is called concurrent planning. So basically, everything that you change at any one point of time as a replanning exercise, maybe at an SKU level itself, it gets populated end to end. Then you have a concurrent plan. Okay, now this is a supply planner's paradise. Okay, what we are hearing about, like you short window plannings, replanning exercises, make changes very often, and go ahead, and at the end of the day you have to meet the market demand, right? So we are all aligned, as supply chain managers. I think this is music to our ears. If we are able to create organization that able to function like that. But I have an additional comment. While this is a supply planner's paradise, this is a CFO's nightmare. Okay, because while we are trying to make the product available, a CFO's KPI is to create a predictable view about the financial for the street and to the stakeholders. Now imagine an LE that is changing every month, and here we're talking about every week or even shorter. Okay, so somehow this entire process has to extend to also be able to populate a much more predictable and a ever-evolving view for the finance, whether it is with the PL end or any other financial statement they want to do. So unless this concurrent planning concept extends to finance and these processes get aligned, you will have a organization that is highly mismanaged and not really aligned to the way we are trying to function. So concurrent planning and integrated business planning ultimately has to create a buy-in from the finance side also, because that is where your quarter-on-quarter number, you can't say, I have not done my weekly cycle replanning, I can't tell you what I will sell. You need to create a predictability. So those are some things that you still have to struggle
Thanks,
with.
Ravi. We have run out of time, but good point to elaborate. I would say that, as a outside view on SNOP that I've been seeing on forecasting, one of the biggest challenge, as you rightly pointed out, is not only finance, but also with the sales. Currency view of the finance has to match the pipeline view of the sales, and customer service and logistics view of the supply chain. Very well supported by the CEO, and it's a part of the strategic business plan. I think supply chain is getting that importance post-COVID to be a strategic membrane of the organization, and will get that particular focus. And once that happens, I'm talking across the industry, that happens, your over-the-line processes are coming together, and below-the-line streamlined processes. And one thing that is very important that you and Srinivas also brought about is that you have to build scenario planning. You need to know the basic trends. You need to quantify the uncertainty in the future. You have to have a 5-year view. Long-term planning is very much there. Yes, there's operational plans and tactical plan which will go on in the long-term plan. There is replanning that needs to be done. And even when you forecast, forecasting is the base forecast. You need outside in view or demand sensing similar issues. You build the demand plan, and then you manage the demand plan with your supply plan and with all your strategic business plan. I think organizations will do better of pandemic and non-pandemic issues. I thank all of you for such a great insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. Pleasure speaking to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh Singh. Thank you, Srinivas, Ravi, Keyur, and Atul for a very wonderful and engaging discussion, very animated discussion. I should also say, I should compliment you for the excellent discussions that you had. We now quickly move on to our next item on the agenda, which is deconstructing pharma value chain. What exactly is it, and what does it mean for pharma companies? How value chains in the pharma and life science world are evolving under market forces, policy environment, and emerging technology. To deliver this, we have with us Professor Prashant Yadav, a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development and associate professor at INSEAD. and a lecturer at Harvard Medical School. I invite Prashant Yadav to deliver his address. Sir, you have 30 minutes. Thank you very much. And meanwhile, I'll request our attendees to keep sending in your questions on chat, and we will take it up with the presenters. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rakesh Singh and the colleagues at ICM for organizing this interesting session and inviting me. What I want to do in the next 20 minutes or so is share with you some ideas about how macro factors, some driven by COVID, but some which have been at play for quite some time now, are changing how we think about manufacturing networks, sourcing networks, and distribution networks, and also how it's reshaping some components of the overall value chain in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry. Most of what I do and I share with you comes from being an observer from the sidelines and not engaging in active play, as many of you and colleagues and people I've worked with who were on the previous panel or are different sessions in this meeting. So the caveat is I am an observer from the sidelines, so I am sharing with you what I hear, see, learn based on discussions with many of you, and hopefully that can be a useful basis for further discussion in the sessions at this meeting. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll start by posing a question which is related to a trend that has been a long time coming. We have gone back and forth on this in the past. This idea that we keep hearing a lot in the policy environment in India, in the United States, in the EU, the idea that backward integration in places or in countries and geographies which are focused on finished formulation as a key strength, and forward integration in geographies or markets which are more on the intermediate raw material, API, other critical input side, or more broadly, the concept of onshoring. So one view of the world is this is a very pervasive and powerful idea. It will endure, it will last way beyond COVID. The winds for this have been started now and there is no going back. The other view is we've been there before. This is not the first time we are hearing conversations about forward and backward integration driven by policy change. Such things don't persist unless they are accompanied by a salient and robust economic reason driving it. So the answer to this is hard. The answer to this, in many ways, if you look back at the history of both the pharma and life sciences industry, but even more broadly of industry and value chains in general, what we find is that policy change alone doesn't shift the way the value chain is organized, which means it doesn't lead to much more backward integration, much more forward integration, or much more onshoring, up to a size of the government support envelope. When the size of the government support envelope reaches a certain threshold, and it varies by industry, it varies by geography, that's when, yes, policy imperative translates into shifts in the industry's value chain. But those thresholds are usually very high. They run into hundreds of billions of dollars over sustained long periods of time for an industry's value chain to shift because of some policy change. So we should keep that in mind when we hear lots of discussion and conversation about onshoring in the US, onshoring of API in Europe, India's backward integration plans and some plans of finished drug formulation and more aspirational finished product industry in China. So I think, again, I'm sharing my opinion. There is not a lot of science which can guide us here. It has to be your own gut feel. It has to be where you think this is headed. But do keep in mind that we have gone through ups and downs on this issue many times in the past and in many other industries as well. So don't think that the trend is very clear and straightforward to interpret or extrapolate from this in your longer term scenario plans or in your plans about where to locate new sites and where to create more sourcing capacity or where to look for new suppliers. The second thing is COVID driven. So, I mean, we all know the vaccine effort has been remarkable in many different ways. It is leaving a legacy which will certainly be lasting. The legacy is expectations of how quickly you can translate something which is in clinical supply into large-scale commercial supply. Those expectations have been reset forever. It'll be hard for us to go back to financial analysts of all the people. I mean, I'm not talking about regulators. I'm not talking about public purchasers. In industry and equity analysts and people who follow and invest in publicly listed firms or private equity firms who invest in privately held firms, their expectations of how quickly you can translate clinical into commercial have changed forever. And the questions they are starting to ask many companies who have late stage development programs are, well, why will it take 3 years? Why can't it be done in 18 months? And I think that, I mean, presumably if the regulators also continue in the pathway of what they've done in the last 18 months, then we will truly see faster translation of development pipeline into product launches and large-scale commercial production. This has also changed how we think about the public sector. And in the past, we know there were many companies in the life sciences industry who didn't have as much to rely on public financing because they could in fact, they could do a very good business by focusing on either export markets alone or focusing on the private market and outside the country markets, whether it's in India or wherever they were located in the world. But the nature of public purchasing and financing has brought about a big ask for the companies as to whether or not they can afford to remain disconnected from the pot of money that sits with public purchasers. And this is harder in some markets, in some therapeutic areas. It's easier in other therapeutic areas and so on. And I think those colleagues who study pharmaceutical marketing and commercial models have also come to realize that what we used to call as a blockbuster was something that required so much planning, meticulous work on a product launch, sales force, supply chain, S&OP, everything had to be geared up perfectly for a product to become blockbuster. But now we have products which are 20 times blockbusters without or almost no spend on marketing and sales dollars and without as meticulously planned product launch events. So I think that's also shifting how we think about clinical attractiveness of new products in the life sciences industry. And that will have a shift in how companies think about the relationship between the commercial model, the sales force, the role of operations. And in a way, the good thing is that I recall sitting in S&OP meetings where the sales team has a certain view of the world and the operations team has a certain view of the world. And we typically accepted that the sales team's version of the world is what the executive team gives higher importance to. And this is a big shift where what the operations team brings will become more important, more influential across firms. It used to be the case in firms which were competing in certain specific therapeutic area that operations was getting an up over sales or commercial views. But I think that can now will probably shift to across the industry. So I want to highlight 7 trends which I have distilled out by looking at what is happening in the pharma and life sciences industry. The first, as I said, is this issue of policy influence, but also enhanced public scrutiny. The number of times supply chain has entered living room conversations. All our friends and our people in our social and professional networks have suddenly learned about what our profession does, which is a good thing and a bad thing. I'll come to why I worry about this a little bit. Secondly, the nature of conversation about supply chain, not only within a company has it reached the executive function very, very clearly, but even in governments, it has reached a different level. Never before have we had heads of state from multiple countries in the world talking about pharma supply chain in their address to the nation or in their large audience political speeches. So while some of us may celebrate saying this is the shining moment of pharma supply chains, heads of state, prime ministers, presidents are talking about pharma supply chains, that's what we all wanted. The downside is that uninformed public scrutiny and uninformed senior leadership policy involvement can hurt us more than what we imagine. And the second is that the public scrutiny here is making people say, well, look at the COVID vaccine development. The scientists did their job so well. It is the supply chain people who are still keeping the world at risk because they cannot scale up faster, they cannot source their key critical input materials on time, and so on. So in a way, the onus is falling more on us in supply chain. The second big trend is CDMOs were not recognized as an integral part of the pharma value chain across all therapeutic areas. In some therapeutic areas, yes, the role of CDMOs was important, but there were others where people said, well, we do that, we use that when we are doing some clinical manufacturing, but beyond that, we don't see much of a role. That has changed. And that is also leading to a larger quantum of private equity and public listed dollars going towards CDMOs of various types and from various geographical origins. So with that, the CDMOs, the big ones, are pursuing a strategy of setting up new sites in locations where they can serve the country's market and export from that market. And those site selection decisions are not driven by what we see as geopolitical trends, and the geopolitical trends including some trade decoupling between many trading nations and so on. Those trends are oblivious of these trade decoupling issues. They are driven by fundamental market forces of where there is a market, where more clinical trials are happening, and where I can establish a site where I can use it both for domestic and for export. So CDMOs, it's an industry to watch. It's highly concentrated in some areas. It's more diversified in other areas, and is getting a lot of dollars into it. The third, which I think you all are very close to, is that this distinction we used to have in the past between how the value chain was organized for a local company and a multinational company is blurring. It is blurring very quickly in all of the big markets, so in India, China. And part of it is the larger involvement in development programs, but also the nature of partnerships have changed. And this is not COVID. This is a trend we've been seeing for the last decade now. It's manifesting itself in different ways, but now the real outcomes are starting to show that the boundaries are much more blurred. Like I said earlier, the translation from clinical to commercial manufacturing has become faster, will continue to become faster. Technology of certain types is helping us in that regard, but most importantly, organizational design has to facilitate that. We cannot work with what I call as that bow tie model, where the only point of connect between the clinical manufacturing and commercial manufacturing teams is when you pass on the technical documents for making a batch, and that's it. I think it has to be with multiple functions in clinical and commercial, having a direct point of interface. So in a way, switching the bow tie into what I call as the diamond model. The fifth point is about new ways of developing products, which have an impact on the way we'll see manufacturing. So in the past, we saw biotech companies would typically focus on one disease area. Even larger pharmaceutical companies, both who had a development program and generics, would take one specific area, develop their core expertise in that, either through chemistry or through fermentation or through other process learnings or through actual biology and development. And then they would say, we have mastered this particular therapeutic area or this particular pathway, and we'll keep developing and producing things in that pathway. That is changing because of this idea that the platform itself is the source of value creation. And by platform, I mean, whether it is mRNA or other kinds of development and manufacturing platforms, right? So what that's doing is that a company doesn't go out and say our core competitive advantage is in this therapeutic area or in this biological mechanism of action or in this way of process chemistry. The company goes out and says our key competitive advantage is in this platform. So they first demonstrate the value of that platform by picking one area and then gradually saying, well, we've shown you the therapeutic modality of our platform with one area. Now we are going to expand it into multiple areas. And that's a slightly different pathway for revenue and growth expansion. But that pathway leads to earlier investments in manufacturing assets. Because if I'm going out and saying I am a platform company, then I have to have manufacturing assets allocated to my platform in a significant way before I can convince people that, yes, I'm worthy of being taken seriously. So as a result, the platform companies have manufacturing investments that are larger. They require larger manufacturing investments, unlike the previous model, where if you develop, you can then go and create partnerships and do external manufacturing, other ways of finding manufacturing partners and so on. Then the last 2 points are about things which are, in many ways, you can call them evergreen, but I think they have become more important due to a few factors. So one is supply chain visibility. It's nothing new. We've worked on this in some form or manner for at least 2 decades, if not longer. But it has become more valuable. And when something becomes more valuable, the business case for investing in different kinds of technology becomes suddenly more salient and more feasible. So there have been technological tools to enhance supply chain visibility across the boundaries of a company, across the boundaries of multiple actors in the supply chain, but they were expensive, and we were worried about whether or not we'll reap the benefits in time. But now with the enhanced importance, I think we have a greater chance of using them. The last point is that export markets and the balance between public and private channels requires the supply chains to be segmented and designed not just for the distribution aspect, but the end-to-end supply chain needs to be thought for a particular segment. So if you're serving the Latin American market, what should your supply chain look like for that market segment? does it, and in the past, it used to be about how do I find the channel partners to sell my product there. But now that segmentation needs to be end-to-end, which is asking from sourcing up to distribution, what will be my supply chain for this segment? Same thing with public versus private. If you do want to sell to public hospitals at the state level, or even let's say the central government level, which have always been about the L1 supplier, the lowest cost, you need a slightly different supply chain for that. And that segmentation question, again, is not new, but I think we have to start becoming more thoughtful because what has happened in the macro environment around us. And the last thing, which is starting to bubble up a little bit more, is the people who focus on climate impact. Given that many large multinational companies are now announcing their net zero programs of being carbon zero in the next 10 years or so. And those programs are becoming very aggressive. I mean, they've started in the large technology companies, but are slowly trickling down into consumer products and also in some life sciences companies. That may very well become mainstream and would have to be something that everybody has to do in their supply chain. There might be pressure from public purchasers in the future to show the carbon impact of the supply chain in pharma, and that would mean a lot has to be changed to fit that. Okay, so those were the key things. Just a little aside here, a memory refresher of COVID vaccine production in geography. And again, this data is controversial. It comes from Affinity. Some numbers are right, some numbers have wider confidence bands, but we should not lose track of the fact, where do we see such quick expansion and such large numbers in production of COVID vaccines? And the reason I say this is not to do with how fast can we scale up COVID vaccine production. The reason I say this is this biologics manufacturing capacity is here to stay after COVID. So if in the future we don't need COVID vaccines, and hopefully not, or we need smaller numbers and so on, this biologics manufacturing capacity is not going to be shut down. This is going to make something. And so in a way, there will be fierce competition of what can we make in these new sites. And that will impact everybody in the industry, maybe not so much for small molecule, but I think for everyone in the biologics business, this is a trend we all are watching. Where is this capacity located? What kind is it? What is its ownership structure? Is it government owned? Is it state-owned enterprise owned? Or is it some private combination owned? What kind of manufacturing assets were put in place? Are they highly modular or not? And so on. Okay, so a couple of things in the last 2 minutes. One is the design of the manufacturing network. I mean, we all have thought about this in, at least in my opinion, 4 distinct ways. One is what we call as product life cycle-based network design, which is early on you manufacture a product in certain types of manufacturing plants. Over time, as the product reaches different point in its life cycle, you say, I'll look for an external manufacturing partner. Even generic companies will find another location to make it, because then it becomes a lot more about cost efficiency and so on. The second, which I was talking about, is technology-based or technology or platform-based, which is new. The third is geography-based. So if this idea of every country expecting some more production on their own soil takes some firm ground, then we'll have to think about geography-based network design more actively. I think the idea of therapeutic area-based network design is somewhat passé. And I mean, what I mean by therapeutic area design is, oh, here is our plant which makes cardiovascular, here is our plant which makes nephrology, and we call them our therapeutic area manufacturing centers of excellence. I think that is going to come under question for some of the reasons I was describing to you earlier. Okay. So flexibility is going to be our friend, has always been, but I want to illustrate something to remind you that flexibility requires thinking very, very carefully how to design and what nature of flexibility. So here's a little toy graphic to show you. On the left side is A single manufacturing plant makes vaccine type, platform or product. On the right side is my textbook case. I'm a professor, so when I go out and teach my students, I would say the ideal case would be if every plant could make every platform, right? And in that is embedded the idea that, yes, you can have fully flexible modular manufacturing, almost a plug and play, swap the plastic parts, etc. We know that the laws of physics, not even the laws of chemistry or chemical engineering, the laws of physics won't allow us to get to the right, at least not in the very near future. But do we have to get to the right? And I think if we think carefully, flexibility of what was presenting in the extreme right is almost the same in the third graphic I'm showing here. And we have a lot of research that points to this and shows that is the case. But it's about thoughtfully choosing which plant will make what platforms. I'm using vaccines here as an example because everybody relates to it quickly today. But this occurs across all products. And that thinking has to change. I think we've done network design with some very different philosophy in the past. And some is technology, which is modular manufacturing and flexibility that we can embed. The second is economic forces. Both of us are forcing a rethink of some of this. Okay. Last thing I want to mention is about the distribution channels. So we are seeing this trend of disintermediation, which has been also accelerated by COVID. And when I say disintermediation, I'm talking about two things happening simultaneously. One is that the distribution channel becoming a little bit more linear at the top, and then becoming what we call as an out tree. Whereas in the past, it used to be an out tree from the very beginning, which means from the very beginning, from the plant onwards, you have a lot of CNF agents, a lot of stockists, a lot of wholesalers, and so on. But now it's a little bit straight, and then it diverges out, and it has fewer intermediaries. So it's disintermediating and not being as dispersed. This helps in many regards. Most importantly, it helps in agile decision-making. But a big unanswered question for which we don't have empirical evidence yet is, can we do high reach in rural and tier 3 markets with this slightly more linear at the top and less intermediary driven distribution channel? And I think people remind me that, well, mankind is doing it, you have a look, come and, but as I observe this, I'm still not clear if that is feasible, if we solve that. I think Dr. Rakesh Singh was talking a little while ago about this idea of demand sensing. Are we doing everything that we can? Again, I want to remind us the nature of tools available for demand sensing now is much wider than it was in the past. So it's, again, an area where we can do a lot more. There's lots of new technology. Some very, very cool technology has come out, and it's not the standard things of put an RFID or warehouse automation, but real things such as drones have become not just a toy idea of seeing whether it can be done, but we have North Carolina Health System, which is distributing product. Ghana as a full country is distributing all of its second line medicines and vaccines. So drones are for real, they are distributing and at prices which are quite competitive to other modes of transport. IoT with data and analytics is doing lots of cool things. And then there is a new set of business models that have come up between the company and the end patient. And there are different archetypes of this in different markets. So India has quite a few new models that have come up, whether it is the new pharmacies, which are backward integrating, digital pharmacies, or it is some kind of new distribution players, or in some cases, new data plays. So I think that's another area where the distribution side is changing. And then one trend which we see in the US, but it's worth asking is this something we are going to see in other markets? Is this integration between the payer? We have the PBM structure in the US, so the insurer, the PBM, and the pharmacies are becoming integrated. And that means their power is unchecked. And if you want to be successful in the market, then your channel design, your service levels, your forecast collaboration, all of those things have to work with this highly integrated and very powerful player in the market, which is the pharmacy plus its PBM plus its insurer. So will that trend be seen in other markets? And if yes, then how will we adapt and adopt different things in the supply chain to work with such a customer? Because then the customer is, I mean, yes, the end patient is the customer, but the intermediary customer is slightly different than just the payer or just the pharmacy or just the wholesaler or cardinal or things like that. So that's another thing to keep in mind. My time is up. I'm going to stop here. If there are questions, comments, either now or later or however you want to do it, I'm happy to do it. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was a fascinating talk covering the future trends in pharma value chain, and it was fascinating to see how we could build probably flexibility into the way we are operating and how things could unravel in the future. It's very fascinating, and I thank you very much for having spared your time to come to our event and give us this presentation. Thank you very much. I do not think we have any questions at this point in time. If any, we would send it across to you and probably get your views on it. We are now moving across to our next panel, which is Managing Global Logistics Challenges, the Way Forward. As India steps up to the challenge of being the pharma capital of the world and the API capital of the world, we need to take a critical look at the challenges in connecting the country to the world. An elite panel of experts from the ecosystem, 3PLs, airports, pharma companies, will discuss the challenges in ensuring end-to-end seamless, integrated, high-visibility logistics operations. And to discuss it with us, we have Manoj Singh, Senior Vice President and Head, Mumbai International Airport Private Limited. We have Pramod Sant, Vice President, Head of Import and Export and Customs, Siemens Limited. We have Ravikumar Tumulapalli, Head Logistics, APAC and Japan, Teva Pharmaceuticals. We have Nihar Med, Vice President and Head, Procurements, Global Supply Chain Management, Cipla. And to lead the panel, we have Satish Lakaraju, Chief Commercial Officer of Agility Logistics. As usual, I request the audience to please keep sending us your questions on chat, and we will take up as much of them as possible. Satish, I invite you to chair the panel, and you have 1 hour, sir. You're on mute, sir.
Sorry. Thank you, Girish. My pleasure to be moderating this session. And since you've done the introduction already of the esteemed panel members on this, I just waiting to see Manoj on the screen. Welcome to Dr. Pramod Sant, Nihar, Ravi and Manoj. I know it's an interesting topic. In general, I think an hour is less given the complexity of what we are seeing. But I think we had some interesting discussion in the earlier panel on a lot of things in respect to the pharma supply chain, and also listen to Dr. Rakesh Singh's comment and later Mr. Prashant Yadav. And I think new words that have come up is flexibility, fungibility, and distribution channel intermediation. But in our discussion today, I think we're going to touch upon some important aspects which we've listed down so that we focus on the right areas. And let me take the opportunity first to start with a question to Ravi Kumar Tumapalli on an important aspect of the supply chain related to control tower. Given that today we see that the supply chain, is the biggest subject of discussion in any boardrooms, really, because for good reasons or bad reasons, we are needed today, and the complexities are only increasing. And in that scenario, a control tower is something which could really help in many ways, is what I would think personally. And probably we can take views from the rest of the speakers, and probably first listen to Ravi. Over to you, Ravi.
Thanks a lot, Satish and ISCM, to bring these forums year on year with interesting speakers and topics. I'm happy to be on this panel today. And coming to the specific topic and the question of Satish, I think, Satish, we have been talking about visibility, transparency for quite some time. And in this age of technology, I think it is no more a topic for discussion, and then we will have to adopt technologies where we will have to bring in new technologies and then see that how transparently our data, our shipments are visible to all of us, wherein we can take some decisions immediately as and when it is needed for. When we talk about transparency, obviously, big organizations, large organizations, we have multiple hundreds of shipments moving across different destinations and origins, and it is not practically possible for us to really focus and look at each and every shipment. And hence, most of the big organizations, manufacturers, as we need to focus on other core areas, we only look at exception handling. So when we are talking about exception handling, we need to have a structure in place where an agency or internal, external, whatever be the structure, every company can design their own structure, wherein a team of people can handle the shipments right from the booking till delivery, including the arrangements with the airline, shipping lines, or getting the containers loaded, or tracking arrangements, whatever needs to be done seamlessly, where they are the experts in the industry. So, one simple example, what I can quote, what we have implemented within our organization is setting up of a control tower. The control tower in our organization is almost about 2 years old now, and which is pretty matured, I mean, I should say, wherein each and every shipment globally, whatever they were is shipping the products, are booked onto the control tower, and it is transparently visible to each and every person who needs to see the data, and all kind of decisions, whether it is operational decisions, whether it is freight decisions, spot codes, everything is visible on the system. I should say that, with this control tower and the system in place, probably we have reduced almost about 90 or 95% of the emails going into each of our mailboxes. So the origin books the shipment. Then once the shipment is organized, pickup is organized, it is connected to the ocean freight or air freight, then all the shipping documents, including the commercial documents, invoice, packing list, airway bills, or the BLs, are uploaded into the system, and instantly it is available to anyone who wants to access those documents, whether we want to download the documents and then file advance customs clearance, etc. That also can be done immediately before even the shipment is arrived. So I think the control tower has met the expectations, or more than our expectations. Initially, we thought it is only a transactional job which can be handled by a set of experts, but it is not only a transactional documents or transactional details, but even most of the exception handling also we are doing it through the control tower itself. So that is one part with regard to the shipment booking and logistics process. And second one, which we have alluded to, or we have been talking about, is basically real-time, temperature monitoring. Even there are a lot of companies who have come with hardware and devices which can monitor the temperatures real time. They can give us the data as and when it is needed. But again, the same problem comes up with similar to what we have talked about the shipment transactions, is basically there should be someone within the organization, in multiple offices, who should monitor those data, who should take responsibility of the exceptions, and then coordinate with multiple agencies to fix an issue where, as and when there is a temperature escalation. So even for this also, we adopted a similar kind of an approach where we have a separate control tower which is monitoring all the shipments with the real-time data loggers, and wherever there is an temperature excursion, or just before the temperature excursion also, the related parties, whether it is the LSP or whether it is the origin and destination people, get the instant alerts on their emails, so that the people responsible can take urgent actions to avoid any serious temperature excursion in the transit. So I think in both ways, from a shipment transparency point of view and temperature loggers transparency point of view, control towers have become the need of the hour, where I suppose companies like Agility, have stepped up their capabilities and have come with innovative solutions to the manufacturers and to support these kind of requirements. So I personally feel, this is the way which all pharma companies, all manufacturers basically can go forward into the future, where the organization can focus on the critical requirements within the organization, and the logistics and transactional elements can be managed by the dedicated team with the control towers. So that's my take on the way forward for control towers. And I hope everyone looks forward this as the next step within the organization, to improve their processes.
Thanks, Ravi. I think the reason why I reached out to you first was that the control tower is something which most of the organizations think, but we see today when we deal with most of the pharma companies, they still like to have in control of many more things. But since you've given a classic case where your partners have been running it successfully, both in terms of the control tower or the real-time data loggers, I will quickly move to Nihar, because Nihar probably can throw some more light in terms of how the partners can be managed, or you may call it vendor management in your terminology, but still be happy with what you want to see in the morning on your dashboard, rather than trying to get to manage the dashboard yourself. Because I know digitalization and automation and robotic process automation have helped us make our dashboards to our customers much faster. But probably you can throw more light before I go to Pramod and then to Manoj on this interesting subject. So you can touch upon even the aspect of managing the risk and in the whole process, Nihar. Over to you, Nihar.
Thank you so much, Satish. Am I properly audible?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So let me take a step back and start from a context of why we need vendor management and why is it so important in this context, right? So we have been talking about terms like efficiency and agility, right? But there is a new term which is coming up now, and which is resilience. So when we talk about efficiency and agility, there is a point A to point B, we are talking of an improvement. When we talk of efficiency, there is a point of level of serviceability, there is a cost which we are trying to improve. When we talk of agility, there is a demand fluctuation between percentage X and Y, which we are trying to improve, right? But when we talk of resilience, we assume that everything will go for a toss and how quickly we can bounce back. Resilience is the quality of a matter to bounce back to its original shape in the shortest possible time. And that is very much applicable to all the supply chains now. We saw, and let me make it a little bit anecdotal and relate to some of the things which happened in the last 1 year in the pharma space, right? So first of all, when we were bracing for the impact of COVID, first time sometime during January 20 or February 2020, all the pharma companies collated, and they organized the raw materials for them, which normally used to come from China, Europe, America, various parts of the world, right? And we were all very quick in doing that. We chartered flights, we stockpiled the raw materials, and even for the next 6, 7, 8 months, we were having stocks with us. But hey, what happened that when the lockdown started in India, right, the packaging material, which were largely an ancillary industry, they were all local. Nobody needed to stockpile them because they were easily available with a lead time of 10, 15 days. But all the ancillary units stopped. And although the manufacturing activities were going on, but there was no packing happening. And if there is no packing, there is no dispatch. There was a severe crisis. So the Murphy was striking here from the most unexpected thing, right? Another example, that when the second wave hit us, right, and during the first wave, we came up with drugs like remdesivir, which were very hopeful in fighting COVID. When the second wave happened, the scale up required in remdesivir was 10x to 15x, right? In the first wave, the demand we saw was a few lakhs of remdesivir vials. In the second wave, the demand shot up to hundreds of lakhs, to roughly around 1.5 crores every month. So there was a 10x to 15x scale up required for all the companies, and there were 4 or 5 companies making remdesivir. So how do you do that? These were the Murphys which are striking from the most unexpected places, and that is the reason resilience is so much important now, right? All of this were overcome by most of the pharma companies, and we made it, right? We still had the drug supply chain running. So one of the most important part here is vendor management, right? So whatever your experiences as a pharma organization or a corporate, the vendors are also experiences the same thing, and probably their size is not as big as yours mostly, and hence the impact on them is much more than what the big corporates of India were experiences. So it is imperative to engage with them, and there are 2 or 3 steps which all of us did to overcome this. Number one is that the first step was to choose your partners. Right now, everyone was not able to just bounce back the way in the time that was expected. So out of your 100 vendors, maybe these 20 would be the ones who would be the easiest to work with. So choose your partner. The second thing is sharing of vision, right? That although it may sound very ridiculous, that, hey, I want a 10x expansion in your capacities. Now, and this was required in the matter of 10, 15 days, right? So unless you share the vision and unless the vendor also partners with you with the same passion, it was not going to happen. So the second step was to share the vision. The third one was to immerse in each other, right? And it was just not possible and just not sufficient to just say that, yes, I want 10x the supplies of the raw materials or packing material, and I'm hands-free and you do that. So immerse in each other, try to understand the challenges with each other face, and try to help each other. What happened was during the first wave, when the packaging units were shutting down, all the corporates started releasing letters which the vendors could show to the police, local police authorities. They started providing food and medications to the truck drivers who used to come. Right? Some of them also started providing shelters for a rest. So these kind of engagement with each other certainly help. The third, probably the third or fourth thing, which is very critical from a pure play supply chain efficiency point of view, is the tools that we use, right? So from a traditional purchase ordering system, most of the companies went into a vendor managed inventory, wherein you share your inventories, you share your plants, your manufacturing plants, you make your warehouse stocks available to the vendor, and then you leave the ownership to the vendor, because then if they have the visibility of what you are going to consume in the next 15, 20 or 1 month, then they would be in a better position to plan their own inventory, and they won't need a guidance or a purchase order from you. Several other tools like quality circles or a certain vendor development programs, everything was done by the Indian companies. And the last part is the sustainability. Now, all of this, you do it, but how do you sustain that, right? One part is the business. The business should keep on running. Today there was COVID. Today there was second wave. There may be a third wave. There may be some other disruption which may come. We just saw in the last 15-20 days one of the largest port of the world shutting down completely, and the whole supply chain was choked, right? So it is very important to have a sustainable engagement or sustainable supply chain, which is external also, while we do a lot internally, right? The net zero, I think the earlier speaker was talking about the net zero and triple bottom line. Today, we don't have that much of a lens, right? However, if we don't start today, when our customers are going to demand, net zero supply chain, couple of years down the line, and it may be faster as well. So these are some of the vendor engagement initiatives, Satish, which certainly help, which we saw in the last 18 months. And I think that in the future, near future, they are only going to grow in their relevance. I'm not talking about the normal engagement initiatives, which mostly all of us companies do, right? So that's my commentary on this, Satish, and I will end here.
Perfect. No, perfect. I think some of the points that I could pick up from your tongue was sharing of the vision with your partners. I think that's something which we also don't do several times. But whenever we did that and when we've interacted, we found it more effective. It's a simple tool, but when we've told our trucker, look, this project of this particular company is so critical, and please put your best foot into it, they've really done it. And that has helped. So I think there are some good points that you brought out, and I'll touch base them later. But let me move to Pramod clearly, because we've seen Suez Canal, we've seen the challenges at China, we've seen the container shortages continuing to happen, and are seeing what is happening with the freight rates both for air and ocean. And there's nothing like the temperature coming down, because even when doctors take your thermometer and put in, you have one set of range in which you can see. But freight rates have gone beyond the thermometer's level of monitoring also, because how do you forecast and tell, what should be the freight in the Q3 or Q4 for supply chain people? Earlier, if someone would have asked me, I would have said, yes, consider $100 more or $300 more. But now it's becoming a challenge. In this challenge, I know a company like Siemens would probably also keep having this discussion from sales and marketing. And how come, what can be done better is always a question. Maybe you would want to throw some light on this, and as well light on the aspect of your collaboration activities that you'll have been doing with Mumbai port as well and airport as well.
Yeah, thank you, Satish. I think this is a very difficult question, and I don't know who has got the answer on that. See, couple of years back, all the industry were always happy because the freight rates were going down, shipping companies' rates every year you were negotiating, supply chain people were